Fox News might not want to say it, but the migrant crisis, for all intents and purposes, is over. According to some of the latest data, from the peak of the migrant crisis, illegal border crossings are down overwhelmingly. And across the board since last year, general immigration, legal or otherwise, is down around 70%. Huffington Post called it Trump getting his wall, figuratively. But now we have another story. Yuma, Arizona has ended its state of emergency as migrant crisis diminishes. And the mayor has praised Trump for his policies. Now, I don't want to act like literally everything's been resolved. But for the most part, it seems that Trump got what he wanted. Because again, not just illegal immigration, general immigration across the board is down. H-1B skilled worker visas are down. And those are being exploited by big tech companies, so we'll get to that. But I also think this might play into why Trump's approval among the black community has actually gone up. While some people refute this, there are 3 polls showing that Trump's support may be in the around 30 or so percent, 36%. One of them from Emerson, which is considered by 538 to be one of the most accurate polls. I think this actually has something to do with Trump's immigration policy, and I've got some articles to back that up. But first, let's get started with what's happening with Yuma, Arizona, why the migrant crisis is effectively over, and why the mayor is praising Trump. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you like to support my work. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address to send things to. The best thing you can do, however, is share this video. YouTube has absolutely been propping up mainstream media, and that includes Fox News. They're the biggest recipient of the algorithmic changes. It's bad news for channels like mine. But if you think I do a good job, then there's one thing that is absolutely more powerful than any algorithmic change, and it's your ability to just share the video. Sharing this word of mouth, it will absolutely trump any algorithmic change. So if you like it, please consider sharing. Let's read. Fox News reports, the mayor of the border city of Yuma, Arizona, has withdrawn his city's state of emergency that was declared in response to this year's migrant crisis at the southern border, saying that the crisis has diminished in recent months. Quote, I'm grateful to be able to withdraw the proclamation of emergency due to the Trump administration's policy changes that diminish the flow of the migrant family units to the Yuma area and prevent releases into the Yuma community, Mayor Douglas Nichols said in a statement earlier this month. Nichols declared a state of emergency in April near the peak of the border crisis when the number of migrants apprehended or turned away at the border soared to over 109,000. The number would hit 144,000 in May, but then declined sharply in the months since then, down to about 42,000 in November. At the time, Nichols said the state of emergency was due to the migrant family releases overwhelming the local shelter system. Fox News goes on to say, the administration has credited a slew of measures for bringing down the number of migrants approaching the border. Most significantly is the ramping up of the migrant protection protocols over the summer, which sees migrants returned to Mexico as they await their hearings. Breaking for a second, for those that aren't familiar, this is the Remain in Mexico policy. Now, there's a lot of people who are upset with it, but it basically says if you want to apply for asylum, you can wait in Mexico. So far, more than 53,000 migrants have been returned to Mexico under the MPP. That has been coupled with asylum agreements with countries such as Guatemala and El Salvador that sees migrants sent there to claim asylum instead. While those policies have drawn significant criticism from pro-migrant and humanitarian groups who warn that they could send migrants into dangerous areas and place them at risk of violence, the administration claims it is those policies that have helped slow the crisis and end the pull factors that brought migrants north. They also mean that apprehended migrants can be processed quicker and in many cases be sent to Mexico or a Central American country rather than released into the U.S. interior. In a press release, Nichols also credited those initiatives for alleviating the crisis in Yuma. In fact, what the Border Patrol has said is they've ended catch and release. I think that's actually in the story. Well, let me just wrap this up. He made the announcement alongside Acting Deputy Department of Homeland Security Ken Cuccinelli, who made the link between administration policies and relief in places such as Yuma. Quote, the number of Central American family units apprehended has decreased by 85% since the height of the crisis in May. And thanks to a number of policies we implemented, we have ended catch and release and are returning, removing, and repatriating more aliens from the border than ever before. Now, communities like Yuma are directly seeing the effect of our efforts. So I want to show you this graph we have here. And again, I want to make sure this is clear. If you're someone on the left and you don't like what Trump is doing, well, then pay attention because this is happening. I'm not going to tell you whether or not you should support or not support it. I just want to show you the details and say I really do think Trump has won this. I mean, 85% decline from the peak of the migrant crisis Yeah, it sounds like a major victory for the president. Now, these numbers from cbp.gov end in September, so this is a bit old, by a few months. But we can see that since May, the number of families being apprehended has dropped dramatically. And of course, we've seen this news report across the board. The Wall Street Journal said in September that U.S. border crossings continue to fall as Mexico disrupts migrant flow. One of the things that Trump did was he organized an agreement with Mexico to secure their borders and make them take care of a lot of the migrant caravans that were heading through the country. Because Mexico took action, that meant less people actually making it to the U.S. border. So it's not just what Donald Trump has done, although you could argue it's his arrangement with Mexico, but Mexico has also taken action against many of the Central American migrants who are coming. Then we have what was briefly mentioned, the Remain in Mexico policy. This story from the Epoch Times in November. Thousands of migrants are voluntarily going back home after being sent back to Mexico under Trump policy. Now, initially, I was going to use an NPR source, but the NPR source was very biased in framing it as though it was like an evil action or something, and I thought that was unfair. The best I could do was Epoch Times, though I'll probably get criticized for using it. Let me read a little bit of the story, and then I want to move on to the Trump raids. Donald Trump, his administration, more specifically, ICE, raided several chicken processing plants. In response, many locals got jobs. But this is an echo, a mirror of what we saw back in 2007, reported by the Wall Street Journal, that these raids resulted in locals in the black community getting new jobs and actually being happy about it. Perhaps this is why we're seeing that approval for Trump is going up, and I'll come to this. But let's read a little bit of this story about how they're returning. Epoch Times reports, thousands of migrants who have been sent to Mexico to wait for courts to process their asylum claims under the Trump administration's Remain in Mexico policy are starting to voluntarily return home, according to a report released by the Department of Homeland Security. The Trump administration has ramped up efforts in the past year to address the influx of illegal immigrants crossing into the U.S. and restore integrity to the immigration system. One of the administration's top priorities is to end loopholes from the current catch and release policy, in which migrants are released into the interior of the country as they await a court hearing, often never to be seen again. So I don't want to rehash what I already read, but I want to show you this story from the Chicago Tribune. The economy is doing really, really well under Trump. Most people, not even Democrats, can deny it. One of the most interesting polls we've seen recently was from USA Today that showed 80% of people believe that their life is going to get better in 2020, and they almost exclusively say it's the economy. In fact, many of them say it's whatever Trump is doing. One of the most interesting comments was from someone in Boston who said, yes, my life is better. Things are going well. I'm saving money, but climate change, right? Well, outside of all of those arguments about climate change or whether or not they'll actually support the president, we can see that even people who don't like the president because he doesn't address certain policies they want to see addressed, they can admit the economy is doing really, really well. I believe one of the factors as to why the economy is doing well is because of Trump's immigration policy. Now, many people have argued that there's no correlation between a lack of low-skilled labor and immigrants. Andrew Yang, for instance, on the debate stage said, take a look at these factories and you don't see migrants working in these factories, you see robots. Now, Andrew Yang's right. But it's also true there are some jobs that, as of today, can't be done by robots. And we have seen not just recent stories, this story from yesterday, Chicago Tribune, but a story from 12 years ago showing that after, I don't believe they had ICE 12 years ago, but after there were immigration raids, it was locals in the black community who were offered up these jobs, and the companies that were doing the chicken processing, the poultry processing, actually offered up an increase in the base salary to try and attract local labor. That backs up a lot of the claims made by Donald Trump about immigration, and perhaps it's evidence to suggest that as Trump cracks down on illegal immigration, and admittedly immigration across the board, that means there's going to be, the demand for jobs will remain the same, but the supply pool will be lower, even if only by a little bit. In this story from the Chicago Tribune, they highlight how people, they got these jobs. Check this out. Sweeping ICE raids in Mississippi's chicken country opened up jobs for American workers. For some, it's complicated, saying, quote, it's like I stole it. I'll only read a little bit of the story, but the Tribune reports, Juan Grant strode into the Koch Foods chicken processing plant for his new job on Wednesday morning, joining many other African Americans in a procession of rubber boots, hairnets, and last cigarettes before the grind. At 20, Grant was too young to remember the days of a nearly all-white workforce in Mississippi's poultry industry or the civil rights boycotts and protests that followed. He was too young to have seen how white workers largely moved on after that, leaving the business of killing, cutting, and packing to African Americans. He did not know the time before Hispanic workers began arriving in the heart of chicken country by the thousands, recruited by plant managers looking to fill low-paying jobs in an expanding industry. But Grant clearly remembered August 7th, the day the Trump administration performed sweeping immigration raids on 7 chicken plants in central Mississippi. He remembered the news flashing on his phone. 680 Hispanic workers arrested. He remembers seeing an opportunity. I figured there should be some jobs. He figured right. The raids were believed to be the largest statewide immigration crackdown in recent history, and a partial fulfillment of President Donald Trump's vow to deport millions of workers living in the U.S. illegally. The impact on Mississippi's immigration community has been devastating. For non-immigrant workers, the aftermath has forced them into a personal reckoning with questions of morality and economic self-interest. The raids brought suffering, but they also created job openings. Some believe that the immigrant workers had it coming. Quote, "If you're someone who ain't supposed to be, they're going to come get you," said a worker named Jamal, who declined to give his full name because Coke Foods had not authorized him to speak. That's only right. There was also Shalonda Davis, 35, a 17-year veteran of the plant. She has seen many workers of all backgrounds come and go, but she was horrified that so many of her Hispanic colleagues were rounded up. Some of them, she said, wanted to work so badly, they tried to return the next day. This story's from yesterday. I've seen bits of it going around, but they highlight how many African-American workers came in and replaced those who were deported or removed by ICE. Now, you can argue, as they showed here, those people weren't supposed to be working here in the first place. I'm not going to put the responsibility on the immigrants or on the local African-American workers who are taking the jobs. I think the responsibility falls on the company who is seeking to exploit cheap labor. This is what's fascinating to me. It's always been a left-wing position to oppose these companies exploiting illegal immigrants. In fact, in 2015, Bernie Sanders said open borders was a Koch brothers proposal, noting that the Koch industries is not the same, or I'm sorry, the Koch processing plant is not the Koch brothers. That's my understanding. But you have to think about it. Why would the Koch brothers or other industrialists want open borders? They can pay below minimum wage to people who aren't here legally because they can't do anything about it. In fact, there were some stories that some plants would hire people, offer them under-the-table cash, and then at the end of the month, call immigration and have them deported. Now, I don't know if those are urban legends or just stories I heard in the past, but you'd think it would be the left saying these companies should not be allowed to exploit the working class and these poor migrants with low wages and no benefits. You'd think they'd be saying they should be paying more to the local community. Instead, for some reason, the left seems to have abandoned this, and it's falling onto Donald Trump to call it out. Check this out, though. I showed you this story from 2019. What if I took you back to 2007? In fact, January of 2017. I'm sorry, January 17th, 2007. Almost 13 years ago. The Wall Street Journal reported this. An immigration raid aids blacks for a time. They say after a wave of raids by federal immigration agents on Labor Day, a local chicken processing company called Kreider Inc. lost 75% of its mostly Hispanic 900-member workforce. The crackdown threatened to cripple the economic anchor of this fading rural town. But for local African Americans, the dramatic appearance of federal agents presented an unexpected opportunity. Kreider suddenly raised pay at the plant. An advertisement in the weekly Forest Blade newspaper blared increased wages at Kreider, starting at $7 to $9 an hour, more than $1 above what the company had paid many immigrant workers. Now I want to stop and just remember this is 13 years ago, so the wages were very different today. It'd probably be $14 to $15 an hour. The company began offering free transportation from nearby towns and free rooms in a company-owned dormitory near the plant. For the first time in years, local officials say Kreider aggressively sought workers from the area's state-funded employment office, a key avenue for low-skilled workers to find jobs. Of 400 candidates sent to Kreider, most of them black, the plant hired around 200. They say a customer at a convenience store in Douglas, GA, told April Polk, a part-time clerk, that a recruiter was in town looking for workers. Ms. Polk passed the word to her husband, 32-year-old Jermaine Royals, who had just been laid off from the latest in a series of temporary jobs. Both are African American. Less than a month after the raids on illegal immigrants, Mr. Royals and 3 other workers met at a gas station parking lot and piled into a van sent by Peacock Poultry, Inc., one of several contractors hired to fill the ranks of Kreider's production lines. 2 hours later, they pulled into an austere complex of brown dormitories owned by Kreider, less than 3 weeks earlier had teamed with Hispanics. Mr. Royals stashed 2 small bags of belongings and a boombox in a dingy room and took his place the next morning on a production line in the chicken plant. For the first time since significant numbers of Latinos began arriving, and still more, in the late 1990s, the plant's processing lines were made up of predominantly African Americans. Now, 13 years later, we hear the same story. And what is the response from Politico? Trump shocks black voters by trying to get their votes. Really? They say the president's re-election team knows he's never going to win sizable African-American support, but that's not the point. Now, this story is just from a couple weeks ago. But take a look at this story from around the same time. Actually, this is from a week ago. Awakening. Black voters abandoned by Democrats warm to Trump. Now, there's a story I highlighted several times in the past few days. It's a Vox article that says the Democratic Party has become increasingly becoming the party of the wealthy. That's from 2016. Think about where we're at now. It used to be the industrialists wanting open borders and bringing in these migrant workers at low wages, displacing the local community and taking away low-skilled jobs. And in 2007, that was under Bush. Now it's Donald Trump. Trump probably saw this. They knew what happened when they raided these plants and deported these undocumented workers, and it resulted in locals getting these jobs. Take a look at this. Former NFL player Jack Brewer once raised campaign money for Barack Obama. Now he's among the increasing number of black voters who support President Trump. Quote, "There's an awakening going on right now in the country," Mr. Brewer said of black voters who traditionally support Democrats. "I'm going to take the guy who's actually putting in the policies that are going to make life better for my young black son and my young black daughter versus somebody who gives me lip service. Like, unfortunately, the Democrats have done for our community for years." They go on to say that the approval rating has gone up dramatically from numerous polls. They say 3 polls in November showed Mr. Trump's job approval rating among black voters in the 30 to 35% range, a significant increase over other surveys that have generally shown black voter support of less than 10%. Quote, "I'll remind you, the president received 8% of the black vote in 2016, said a senior Trump campaign official." Now, I can't tell you specifically what Mr. Brewer was referring to in terms of policies Trump was going to enact that would help the black community. I can look at the latest story just the other day from the Tribune that after these raids, undocumented workers are being displaced. They're not supposed to be legally working here in the first place, and it's the local community, the African American community, they're being given these jobs. And a lot of these people are happy they're getting these jobs. You know what? One of the most important things, and one of the things that bothers me most about racists, period, anywhere in the world, is the assumption that people are racially driven due to some genetic factor or something to commit some kind of crime or to be criminally predisposed. The reality is data shows us poverty breeds crime. And this is why you're likely seeing comments like this from people like Brewer. If the Democrats are going to be all about tacit open borders, not direct open borders, but being welcoming of undocumented immigrants and protecting them and refusing to deport them, as many of them have said, you're going to create people in communities, primarily African-American communities, who don't have jobs. Thus, you will create more poverty surrounding the area, and poverty breeds crime, not race. This is fuel for the racists. It's one of the most frustrating things in trying to explain how poverty does this. If Donald Trump is telling these factories, you cannot break the law. Unfortunately, there are people who are being negatively impacted by this. The immigrants, the undocumented immigrants, they're not supposed to be working here in the first place, but it's going to help those who are American first, hence Donald Trump's, nationalism. But I want to end with a few more things because it's not just about, support. I wanted to highlight this. I think this is very interesting. But you have to understand that what Trump is doing isn't just changing the face of illegal immigration, but also illegal practices or sneaky practices by major corporations to skirt immigration laws to bring about skilled labor from foreign countries when they shouldn't be doing it. First, here's I'm not going to get into this. This is a story that says the radical immigration changes under Trump that went unnoticed. I was actually looking at this one. This is Quartz, India. An Indian CEO is held for duping U.S. visa authorities to bring in 200 foreigners. Exploitation of the H-1B. Take a look at this story. This is a story from, Dice.com. I'm not super familiar with what Dice is, but this is from October. This is not a certified NewsGuard source, so just keep it in mind. But it's one of the very few outlets that actually talk about how Google and Amazon are exploiting H-1Bs. H-1B is a skilled labor visa into bringing people into this country. For one, there's been a story going around, I don't have it pulled up, so this one you got to fact check me on, that says, first, if you want to bring in skilled labor, you have to prove you couldn't find American labor to fill that role. So what they do is they take out jargon-laden, confusing articles in small-town papers, and then when no one responds, they say, it didn't work. And then they stuff the H-1B lottery system to try and get as many workers as possible. But according to this story, we can actually see they do something else. They use secondary subcontractors to double up their H-1Bs. Take a look at this. While Google is in the middle, Facebook is not the worst, Apple will will apply for 836 primary H-1Bs, but use contractors to apply for 2,274 so that Apple can double up the visa for essentially the same job. You can see Google primarily uses their own, applies for their own visas, but still uses secondary contractors. Basically, it's being accused, and I'll make sure this is I will be very careful on this one. What I've been told, as it's been explained to me, is that Google and Amazon and these other tech companies will just litter the lottery system with as many tickets as possible. It's kind of like a raffle. It's a lottery system. And this makes it very, very difficult for smaller companies, medium-sized companies, to actually get the skilled labor they can't find anywhere else. When it comes to an H-1B, the general idea is if no one in America can do the job, and you can explain why they can't, and you win the lottery, we will bring in skilled labor from a different country into the U.S. Now, Trump, it's my understanding, has cut down H-1Bs and is doing everything to stop the exploitation, or he's doing some things to stop the exploitation. But what I've heard from medium-sized tech companies is that when they literally can't find developers in the U.S., they still have trouble getting skilled labor from foreign countries because of how the system is exploited by big tech. I'll end by saying this. You get the point. The main takeaway from all of this is I think whether you like Trump's policies or not, he is seeing growing support, likely due, at least in some part, to these immigration policies. The economy is doing well, likely in part to the immigration policies. Apprehensions are way down. Yuma has cleared their state of emergency. I would say Trump has taken a victory on this front. It's likely why you're not really hearing about it a lot in the press. It's probably why they're shifting to impeachment. Nobody wants to make the story saying Trump, declares victory on this issue. Or at least I should say, it's not going to become a dominant news cycle story because when do they ever talk about Trump succeeding in something? But here you can see he did it. Trump got what he wanted. Is it perfect? No. Did he get a big, beautiful 30-foot concrete wall from sea to shining sea? No. But he is building new fencing, bollard fencing. They have secured key areas already. And according to the Huffington Post, a story I covered several times, they said Trump got his wall figuratively, meaning immigration across the board is just down. I think it's fair to say that what we're seeing now is the end of the migrant crisis, a victory for Donald Trump as the state of emergency is cleared. Let me know what you think in the comments below. We'll keep the conversation going. I think I'm going to do something new for the new year. So this is a heads up for everyone on this channel. I will have more videos coming up at youtube.com/TimCastNews at 6 p.m., 6:15, and 6:30. However, I think starting next year, I might put every single segment on this channel, and I might turn my second channel into a new live show where every day around 8 p.m. I would just do a live kind of Q&A style thing, but also try and have a guest as we sort of riff about subjects that don't make the main segments, essentially creating a whole new show. I'm building a studio. If you've gone to my YouTube channel, Timcast IRL, which is in the side, you can see that we've got the early images of the construction, but it's going to be done very soon. So by the time I'm back home, it'll all be there. And I think we're going to try and, we got some work to do, maybe design a small set, but I think the goal will be to do more of a general news, not super political podcast show with a consistent guest, and we'll see what happens. I'm really excited for it. But again, I've talked about a bunch of projects. Some of them have been false starts because they're really difficult to get going. And admittedly, if I start a new show, it's going to be very difficult to do a road show with the van. 2020 is coming up. Just keep it in mind, okay? Because it may be what happens, but I think regardless, I already put my main segment, I already put a segment at 10 a.m. on my main channel. You may have noticed. That's probably going to be the case from now on because certain algorithmic changes have made 2 channels redundant. But I'll leave it there. Thanks for hanging out. Stick around. I will see you all at 6 p.m. youtube.com/TimCastNews. And again, stay tuned. We'll see what happens in the new year. But for those that I don't see again, New Year's Eve is tomorrow. I hope you have a good time, and I will see you soon.